Astronaut John finally returned from space. The familiar Earth beneath her feet had become the strangest cage. She had become an adulteress scorned by everyone, her once cheerful daughter Alice had grown withdrawn, and her beloved husband had become a poor man in the eyes of others. What was even more bizarre was that she had never touched a piano before, yet her fingertips could dance across the keys, pouring out a touching melody. John doubted countless times whether he had completed an interstellar voyage, or accidentally entered a different world that was out of sync with reality. The night spread like ink staining paper. John drove down the highway with Alice in the car. The sound from the car radio was intermittent, mixed with sharp hisses. It repeatedly broadcast a warning that the world is about to end. Alice clutched the corner of John's clothes and asked softly, "Mom, when will Dad come?" John's heart sank sharply, and she didn't answer her daughter's question, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. A police car was rapidly approaching from behind, its headlights cut through the night with blinding light. She gripped the steering wheel tightly until her knuckles turned white. Only when the police car passed their vehicle without pausing did she let out a sigh of relief. Her back was already soaked with cold sweat. Finally, John and Alice arrived at a wooden house in the outskirts. She tidied up the room carefully, then took an object that looked like a handheld lamp, and hid it in a hidden patch of grass outside the wooden house. Just as she turned around to go back inside, a crying call of "Mom" from Alice suddenly came from a distance. John's heart constricted sharply, and she ran back to the house at once. But when she pushed open the door, Alice was clearly already asleep in bed. Her eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and her breathing was steady. That call seemed to be nothing but an illusion in the night. She gently closed the door, then followed the faint sound toward the darkness outside the house. The evening wind swept up the fallen leaves, making a rustling sound. Memories suddenly came flooding back like a tide. Everything that had happened 5 weeks ago was as clear as if it were yesterday. John was an astronaut. At that time, she was on a mission with her colleagues at the International Space Station, and they still had 84 days before they could return to Earth. So she could only communicate with her husband and daughter via video calls. On this day, the space station was set to conduct a special experiment. It would test a new substance under zero-gravity conditions in space, and the equipment used for the experiment was the handheld lamp John had. Commander Paul activated the equipment, however, before they could observe the substance's reaction. A loud explosion rang out on the space station. The entire cabin also began to shake. In the chaos, a steel rod pierced Paul's arm. The ground control center hurriedly informed the astronauts that the cabin was experiencing severe decompression, and that they must rush to Escape Pod 1 for an emergency evacuation. The cabin where John was located had already returned to calm. She went to Paul's side, and found that he had fallen unconscious due to excessive blood loss. John decided to perform an amputation on Paul, and asked her colleagues to inspect the spacecraft. But one bad news after another came. The space station was already overwhelmed. Escape Pod 1 had a power failure. Only Escape Pod 2 was usable, but Escape Pod 2 could only hold 3 people. Just as everyone was at a loss for what to do, Henry, the project director of the ground space station, after seeing the data transmitted instantly from the handheld lamp experiment, actually ordered John and the others to continue the experiment no matter what. John had to go outside the station to perform maintenance work. After inspection, John found that the space station was severely damaged and beyond repair. Upon hearing this, the NASA commander ignored Henry's request and told John and the others to hurry back immediately. However, on the way back, John accidentally spotted an obvious crack on the exterior of the space station. She walked over to the crack to investigate, when a mummified astronaut corpse collided with her. If she hadn't been secured by a safety tether, John would have likely become a mummified corpse in space too. Luckily, Ilya rescued her just in time. John returned to the space station only to learn that Paul had passed away. She was utterly devastated, yet there were still 4 people left on the space station. How to decide who would stay and who would leave? After a moment of silence, as the acting commander, John decided to sacrifice herself. Her 3 teammates were deeply moved, and immediately activated Escape Pod 2 to depart. John prepared to repair Escape Pod 1. She had 19 hours to do so. In such a life or death situation, NASA had already notified John's family and asked them to come for a final visit. Yet John didn't rush to repair Escape Pod 1. Instead, she went to the cabin to find a bracelet, a gift from her daughter. To her, it was more precious than her own life. After retrieving the bracelet, John set about replacing the power battery. Unexpectedly, the ground control center issued a new mission. They ordered her to retrieve the new substance from the handheld lamp. Henry, the project director, claimed the substance was extremely important and would change the entire world and human civilization. John decided to go back for the handheld lamp after replacing the battery. Just then, her husband Meg and daughter Alice had already arrived at the command center, but before they could even speak, the communication suddenly cut off. Even the lights on the space station were going out one by one. John knew this was a sign that the space station's energy was about to run out. John grew anxious. Suddenly, she heard another strange noise coming from the cabin. She returned to the cabin, and as soon as she reached the handheld lamp laboratory, she saw a bizarre sight ahead. It was actually a corridor in an office building. She walked to the end of the corridor, where her bracelet was hanging on a door. Yet when she turned around, what she saw was still the interior of the space station. John still couldn't figure out what was happening with all this. Coming back to her senses, John continued to follow the sound through the snow. Before long, she arrived at another wooden house. Snowflakes were still falling from the sky, but miraculously, the snowflakes fell extremely slowly, as if frozen in mid-air. What's more, this wooden house was remarkably similar to her own. Even the furnishings inside were identical. John walked to the end of the wooden house's corridor and saw a door there. Her bracelet was hanging on it. When she opened the door, she was shocked to find her daughter hiding inside. Upon seeing her mother, her daughter was overjoyed and asked where she had been all this time. Alice had clearly been there for a while. Her whole body was cold, and her breath was faint. John hurried to carry her daughter back to the house and lit a fire to warm her up. Unexpectedly, her daughter asked her another strange question. "Are you a ghost?" John thought her daughter might have been frozen silly, so she quickly ran hot water for her to take a bath. She smelled the scent in her daughter's hair. Everything felt so familiar. John couldn't help but say something strange. "Your scent is back." Just at this moment, John suddenly saw in the mirror that her daughter was sound asleep in bed. Then who was the daughter in the bathroom? Perhaps the noise woke the sleeping daughter. She got up and looked at her mother with confusion. John hurried back to the bathroom to check, only to find no traces left. Even the bathwater was gone. John had no idea what had happened. She smelled the hair of her daughter, who had just woken up, but she realized this scent was different from the other daughters. What on earth was going on? This wasn't the first time John had encountered such a paranormal incident. When John was repairing the power battery on the space station, a white cloth suddenly floated over. She turned around and saw that Paul's corpse had actually opened its eyes. The sight filled John with extreme terror. Fighting back her fear, she closed Paul's eyes again. All these bizarre signs made her unsure if she would survive. So she started recording with a tape recorder, hoping to ease her inner fear. But for some reason, a hoarse, deep male voice was always present in the recording. Just then, John noticed there was a palm outside the cabin door. She opened the door, only to find that it was Paul's severed arm. At this point, the ground control center, having been unable to contact John for a long time, had already declared John dead. But after making desperate efforts to repair it, John fixed Escape Pod 1 at the last minute. And when she excitedly prepared to return to Earth, she found that the life pod's navigation system couldn't be activated due to the lack of ground signals. Fortunately, John was also a highly educated person, and actually managed to simulate the latest orbital parameters and trajectory through manual calculations combined with the parameters used previously. After everything was ready, John remembered the task assigned by Henry, the project director. She ran back to the experimental cabin, found the handheld lamp, and brought it back to the escape pod. John had done everything she could, but still didn't know if she could return home safely. She recorded all the words she wanted to say to her daughter on a tablet, and left it on the space station, which could be regarded as writing her last words in advance. However, just as John prepared to start the escape pod, she found that the bolts had malfunctioned, preventing the pod from detaching from the space station. According to the manual, the malfunction could only be resolved by two people operating simultaneously. John was instantly filled with despair. This time, she was truly powerless, but for some unknown reason, even though she had resigned herself to her fate, she found that the bolt malfunction had resolved itself. John was both excited and confused, and when she looked towards the space station, she saw a human figure. John thought she might be seeing things. She didn't have time to think more, as the upcoming process was still extremely dangerous. The entire escape pod plunged into the thick atmosphere, generating intense friction. The ground control center finally received the signal from escape pod 1, and everyone's spirits were lifted. However, John was using a ballistic landing, and no one knew where the escape pod would land. They could only expand the expected search area and conduct a large-scale search. Soon, John's escape pod crashed into the ground. Thanks to the buffer provided by the parachute at the last moment, John survived. When John woke up, she found herself on Earth. She was filled with the joy of surviving a near-death experience. Unexpectedly, the first thing to greet her was a fierce wolf. John was extremely nervous. Just as she thought she was going to be the wolf's lunch, a gunshot rang out. It turned out that the search and rescue team from the ground center had arrived just in time. Accompanied by her husband Meg and her daughter, Alice was extremely excited to see her mother again. And John was even more emotional. However, Henry, the project director, only cared about the handheld lamp and the new substance inside it. Henry couldn't wait to activate the device, but saw no abnormalities, except that he didn't notice that the mysterious substance inside the handheld lamp was emitting a strange glow. Perhaps affected by this strange substance, the three family members who had just been reunited suddenly fell into a bizarre scene. Alice found herself alone with no one around her, only herself and the helicopter, and John also fell into the same bizarre scene, but soon, the surroundings returned to normal. John said a sentence in Dutch, which the family occasionally spoke. Unexpectedly, both Alice and Mag looked confused. After she finished speaking, John fell into a coma again due to weakness. Back at the wooden house, it was the 5th week since she returned to Earth. During this time, she had experienced too many paranormal incidents. She asked Alice, "Have you seen my daughter? Have you seen another version of yourself?" Alice was both frightened and confused. John hurriedly told her daughter to put on clothes, then found the hidden handheld lamp, and stepped into the snowstorm again to start searching for the other Alice. In fact, John had really experienced a lot in these 5 weeks. When she first returned to Earth for her physical examination, Alice actually felt that her mother had changed into a different person. She lay there as if she were dead, and at the hearing on the next day, reporters asked why the accident had happened. John was just about to talk about her own experience, but was interrupted by a colleague beside her, who said that the investigation wasn't over, so no specific results would be announced. Having finally returned to Earth, John only wanted to live a peaceful life with her family, but because the accident had not been clarified, she had to stay at the base to cooperate with the investigation. At the accident investigation meeting, John and several colleagues all attended. In charge of this investigation was Elena, the commander-in-chief of the evacuation operation, who was once a highly decorated astronaut affiliated with the Russian space agency. During this meeting, John talked about the mummified astronaut she had seen, and believed that it was this mummy that had collided with the space station and caused the accident. Judging from the clothing, this should be a female astronaut from the Soviet era in the 1960s. However, Elena directly denied this. She said that the mummy couldn't have drifted in the orbit full of space debris for decades, and that there were no reports of astronauts dying in orbit. She believed that everything might be John's hallucinations. John knew that what she had seen wasn't a hallucination, but after arguing back and forth, there was still no result. While eating in the dormitory, John noticed her husband's hairstyle had changed. She praised her husband's new hairstyle for looking nice, but Mag was clearly uncomfortable, since they hadn't communicated like this in a long time. Later, on her way to the bathroom, John accidentally fell. With just a turn around, she saw that office building corridor again. Her bracelet was still hanging on that wooden door. Why was she still seeing all this? Perhaps it was because Henry had activated the handheld lamp device again. Henry told his assistant, "This mysterious substance produces double quantum signals when it collides. It creates 2 outcomes for a single event, just like the parallel universe people talk about. It's just that this is rarely seen on Earth." Henry stared at the device all afternoon, but there was no response. He thought all this was meaningless, but Henry knew well that the data from space and the escape pod's landing site both showed abnormal data. This phenomenon must exist. Finally, in the middle of the night, Henry saw the mysterious double quantum signals again. He originally wanted to take a photo of it, but for some reason, electronic devices couldn't capture it, so he had to draw it by hand. And it was at that exact moment that John saw the corridor's wooden door again. The investigation meeting continued the next day. Elena came up with a new explanation. She said that in the 1970s, the garbage bags people threw into space looked very similar to astronauts' clothing. Maybe John had mistaken a garbage bag for an astronaut. John had no strength to argue and could only accept this conclusion, but her colleague Aries came over to comfort her, saying he would always support her. After speaking, he even tried to touch John's cheek. John resisted instinctively, which made Aries a little surprised. On the other side, the mysterious substance inside the handheld lamp started flickering again. Henry happened to see Alice playing outside, along with Lana, the daughter of the fallen Commander Paul. Hiding aside, Alice saw Lana throw her rabbit into the sewage and step on it. She rushed out to stop Lana, but Lana said she hadn't stepped on the rabbit. She had kindly found the rabbit and was returning it to Alice. Alice picked up the rabbit and found there were no water stains or dirt on it. She couldn't help but feel confused. Had she really misseen it? Henry, who was upstairs, understood what was happening when he saw all this. It must be the effect of the strange substance's double quantum energy. He walked over to Alice and told her, a single thing can exist in 2 different states. For example, your rabbit is clean in this world, but it might be dirty in another world. There is a liminal space between these 2 worlds. In that liminal space, the rabbit keeps switching between clean and dirty, until the moment you see it, then it settles into one state. Alice listened, half understanding. At home, John and Mag were pouring their hearts out to each other, and soon they ended up in bed. Mag felt John had changed a lot. The way she looked at him seemed to say she loved him deeply. John was amused instantly. She had always loved her husband deeply. She didn't understand why her husband had suddenly said something like that. The next day, John and her colleagues went to pay their respects to the fallen Commander Paul. John told her colleagues that she had indeed seen the mummified astronaut, and that its clothing was the same as that of Russian astronauts from 60 years ago. But her colleague reminded her, the photo you found, that's what the investigation leader Elena looked like back then. John was shocked when she heard this. However, a bizarre scene soon happened again. While paying her respects to Paul, she saw the deceased Paul standing on the other side, holding a bunch of white flowers in his hand. But when she tried to look more carefully, Paul had disappeared again. All these strange incidents made John feel a little agitated. She no longer insisted on whether what she had seen was a garbage bag or a mummy. To leave this place as soon as possible, she admitted that she had misseen it. After returning to her real home, John felt very comfortable. It was just that she didn't know when her husband had changed their car to a blue one. Mag also felt confused when he heard this. The family car has always been blue, he said. John fell silent again. In fact, everything John had experienced, Henry and Elena had also gone through. They were not only partners, but also former comrades who had carried out space missions together. They had maintained a deep, intimate relationship in private. Hearing that Elena had an incurable disease and didn't have long to live, they decided to cherish every chance to be intimate. Unexpectedly, in the heat of the moment, Elena turned into that mummy. This scared Henry out of his wits. Strangely enough, in another space, another Henry was talking to a detective on a cruise ship. This detective had been investigating Henry. He believed that Henry had killed his teammates. During that space mission back then, Henry pushed the detective into the sea. John continued to search for the other daughter in the snowstorm. Alice told her mother, "People who have been to outer space may have hallucinations." But John looked at Alice and said, "I don't want to make you sad, but I think you're not my daughter." After hearing this, Alice retorted, "If I'm not your daughter, then who are you? What have you done to my mom?" Both John and Alice realized something was seriously wrong. Actually, ever since John came home, everything had been filled with a sense of alienation. For example, the red car she remembered had turned blue. Another example, when they were playing a question game, John said her name in Swedish, but her husband and daughter had no reaction. They didn't understand Swedish, yet John remembered clearly that she had told her family her Swedish name many times before. Mag also couldn't understand his wife's changes. Before this, the couple had a very distant relationship and barely communicated. He had even prepared for a divorce. Hearing her husband's words, John found it utterly unbelievable. In her memory, their relationship had always been good. Even during her time on the space station, she had missed her husband every day. But looking at her husband's cold response, she began to wonder if she was really having a mental breakdown. John wanted to have a serious talk with her husband, but he dropped another bombshell. He said John's heart wasn't at home. On weekends, it was always him taking their daughter to the wooden cabin for vacations. He had also heard that John was having an affair with her male colleague Aries from work. Word had long spread among the people around them. He hoped his wife would admit it openly, but how could John admit to something she had never done? John wanted to seek help from a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist believed that after experiencing a life-or-death crisis in space, John had developed stress-induced cognitive impairment. The doctor prescribed a box of medicine for John, but John was deeply reluctant inside. She knew this kind of medicine would have side effects on the body. A few days later, John returned to work at the space agency. Her colleagues gave her a warm round of applause, but no one knew what Henry was thinking that the double quantum experiment had hit a bottleneck, and the project might well be suspended. Henry called John into his office, and took the initiative to bring up the strange things that had happened on the space station. He said he had a colleague whose child had passed away during a space mission. This colleague had narrowly escaped death. It was at the critical moment that he was warned by his child's voice and survived. There were many similar incidents. He wanted to know if John had experienced anything similar. John didn't answer him, staring at the handheld lamp in front of her. Her mind was filled with the bizarre scenes from the space station. After work, John went to pick up her daughter from school. The teacher told her that Alice was too withdrawn and sensitive at school, which was likely related to family influences. At the same time, she noticed that her husband was exchanging flirty glances with a female teacher from the school. It seemed their relationship was far from ordinary. She confronted her husband, but he said she was just being too sensitive. After returning home, John couldn't find her daughter anywhere. After searching for a long time, she found Alice hiding in the wardrobe, and her bracelet was still on the wardrobe door. It turned out Alice often hid in the wardrobe. It was her safe space, but John couldn't understand why her once lively and cheerful daughter had become so withdrawn. After her daughter fell asleep, John saw the piano at home again. Even though she had never learned to play the piano, when her fingers touched the keys, she could play beautiful music. John thought she might really be having a mental breakdown, so she prepared to take the psychiatric medicine. But she noticed that this medicine was surprisingly similar to the one prescribed by the space agency. She took the medicine from the space agency to the laboratory for testing, and found that they were all psychiatric drugs. Later, she went to the database, and discovered that many colleagues who had returned from space had taken these drugs, because they all claimed to have seen unimaginable things. Just then, 2 staff members came to deliver goods, but they acted as if they couldn't see John. John found this extremely strange. She walked up to one of them and shouted loudly, but in the blink of an eye, the 2 delivery staff disappeared without a trace. John ran out in a panic, when passing by Henry's room, she saw Henry actually talking to a version of himself on the computer. He said to John with a meaningful tone, "Curiosity killed the cat." All these abnormalities made John feel suffocated. Colleague Aries ran over to have a showdown with John again. He said they had agreed to run away together before, and his feelings hadn't changed. John listened, completely confused, and when she got home, Aries followed her back and admitted his affair with John to Meg face to face. John still strongly denied it, but Meg couldn't listen to her. John was also very annoyed. She swept the clutter off the table in one go, only to find 2 audio tapes underneath. She quickly played them on her daughter's tape recorder. One was the voice she had recorded on the space station, and the other was the last message left by a female astronaut before her death in 1967. At this moment, Alice was woken up by the noise downstairs. She got up and went downstairs to check, only to find that a funeral for her mother was being held downstairs. At the funeral, there was a little girl who looked like her. Also looking back at her, Alice screamed in fear. John and Meg rushed over upon hearing the sound, yet everything in front of Alice had disappeared. Meg picked up their daughter and put her into the wardrobe. John accused her husband of not being supposed to do this, but only in this way, with her dad by her side, could she feel safe. Meg thought John had scared their daughter. He hoped John would take the medicine as prescribed by the doctor, but John believed that the space agency wanted her to take the medicine to make her forget everything she had seen in space. Meg took out his phone and called Aries, wanting him to take John away. John hurried to stop him, but accidentally pushed her husband to the ground, and he passed out immediately. John quickly dialed the emergency number, then she hurriedly packed her things and left with her daughter. She believed that the space agency must be setting a trap to frame her, and make her forget everything about the space station. The more this happened, the more John wanted to find out the truth. At that time, the 2 audio tapes she had found. One was the content she had recorded on the tape recorder on the space station, but at that time, the space station had already lost contact with the ground. So why could the ground still receive the recording? She returned to the space agency to look up information, but failed to do so because she lacked sufficient authority. However, she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she took that strange handheld lamp away. She planned to leave the city with her daughter first. On the way, she found a restaurant and let her daughter have breakfast first, then asked her daughter why she liked hiding in the wardrobe. Her daughter said it was because there was always a woman whispering strange things in her ear. John wanted her daughter to overcome her fear, so she asked her daughter to draw the woman's appearance. Unexpectedly, what her daughter drew was the mummified astronaut John had seen before. John felt even more that something was weird. She decided to go to the home of the person who had sent her the audio tapes to find out the situation. Upon arriving, she found that it was a brother and sister. Both of them were astronomy enthusiasts. They had intercepted the recordings using old-fashioned equipment, but when they sent them to the space agency, the recordings were deemed fake. The brother had even gone to jail because of this. This time, they sent the tapes to John only hoping to help her find out the truth. At the brother and sister's home, John also found a photo of Henry. Henry had also been an astronaut before, but his personality changed drastically after a space mission, and he had also tried to come here to retrieve the recordings. John wanted to find out more, but the brother and sister told John to leave quickly. It turned out that the 2 of them had been under surveillance by the space agency all along. Later, they took John out to sea. The elderly woman said that 8 kilometers away from the sea surface, it seemed possible to reach a certain boundary area, where you could hear sounds that you couldn't hear normally. After reaching the target location, the elderly woman played a recording from 1967. The only female astronaut who went to space at that time was Elena, but the recording indicated that Elena had already died. So why did Elena in reality return safely? Later, they played another recording, and to their surprise, it was Commander Paul's voice. John's face turned pale. She had seen Paul die with her own eyes. How could there still be his voice? The elderly woman said that since humans first went to space, more than 500 people have flown out of Earth one after another, but a large number of them have been diagnosed with mental disorders. After all, they are all trained talents selected from thousands. How could they easily have problems? The elderly woman believed that there must be something wrong in space, and someone in the space agency is covering up the truth. On the other side, Henry trembled with excitement when he realized his beloved handheld lamp was gone. Just then, a faint, ethereal voice, seeming to come from his counterpart in another world, rang in his ears. It seemed to be inviting him to celebrate Thanksgiving. Later, Henry wrote "Leave me alone" on the glass. In another parallel world, the Henry wearing a floral shirt was on the phone, and he also saw the message from the Henry in the white shirt on the glass in front of him. It turned out that the 2 parallel worlds could communicate in this way. Could this be quantum entanglement, where a change in one quantum can cause a change in another? The matter didn't end there. Henry found Aries and said he wanted to go find John with him, since she might have taken the handheld lamp. Aries originally didn't want to take Henry along, but when he saw Henry had excitedly wet his pants, he finally agreed. In fact, Wetting his pants wasn't Henry's intention, it was the mischief of the floral-shirt Henry from the other world. The white-shirt Henry asked if the floral-shirt one had stopped taking his medicine. The floral-shirt Henry confirmed that he had. The floral-shirt Henry believed that it was the white-shirt Henry who had brought the quantum experiment to space, which caused all the chaos, so he would go to the white-shirt Henry's world to take revenge. But the white-shirt Henry said the floral-shirt one couldn't do it. The floral-shirt Henry wasn't angry. At least he had made the white-shirt one wet his pants now. On the other side, John had already taken Alice to the cabin. She played the audio tapes, and there happened to be a recording of her conversation with her daughter. But after listening, Alice said that the person talking to John in the recording wasn't her, since she didn't know how to speak Swedish, and at the end of the recording, there was a loud explosion followed by Paul calling John's name. What on earth was going on here? It turned out that all these sounds came from another parallel space. 5 weeks earlier, on the space station, John was talking to her daughter, while Paul was conducting the double quantum experiment. When the handheld lamp device was activated, a violent tremor occurred. Two outcomes emerged from this tremor. One outcome was that Paul's arm was pierced by a steel rod, and he eventually died from blood loss. The other outcome was that John hit her head on the space station's door, and died. Heroically, we refer to the world where John died as World A, and the world where Paul died as World B. The story of John we have told so far has always taken place in World B, perhaps due to the influence of the strange substance. Even though John in World A was already dead, her spiritual consciousness had entered the body of John in World B. This explains why John felt out of place in this world, and why John found that her daughter and husband were different from what she remembered. In World A, Alice was lively and cheerful, and Meg and John were deeply in love. When the two heard about the space station accident and John's death, they were both overwhelmed with grief. When they rushed to the space agency, John's body hadn't been brought back yet. She was supposed to return with Paul in Escape Pod 1. Paul had already repaired the power battery by then. It seemed that everything John had done in Universe B was replaced by Paul in Universe A. The difference was that Paul in Universe A didn't find the handheld lamp. Paul also experienced all the strange things John had gone through, and even felt that John was still alive. He could always hear John's faint, indistinct voice. Paul felt a little scared, and besides, when returning to Earth and re-entering a gravitational environment, John's body would bleed heavily, so he decided to leave John's body in space. On the other side, Alice couldn't wait for her mom at the space agency, so she ran to hide in a cabinet in the corridor. Just then, she saw her mom's figure approaching from outside, getting closer and closer, but when she opened the cabinet door, she saw nothing. This corresponds exactly to what John saw on the space station at that time. The corridor was a result of the mysterious substance affecting the two spaces. Soon, Paul also returned to Earth. He also experienced everything John in Universe B had gone through, including the bolt malfunction, and seeing John's figure during the memorial ceremony. However, there were also differences. At the investigation meeting, Paul mentioned the double quantum experiment he had conducted with Henry, but the space agency stated that they had never carried out a double quantum experiment. Paul was instantly thrown into doubt about his own reality. He began searching for information online, and found a video of a failed moon landing from many years ago. In the video, many astronauts died, and only Henry survived. This shocked Paul even more, because in his memory, an accident had indeed occurred at that time, but Henry had handled it excellently, allowing the space mission to be completed successfully without any astronauts dying. Paul had no idea why everything had turned out this way. He decided to go find Professor Henry to get an explanation. After all, Henry was the initiator of the double quantum experiment. But when he arrived at the space agency, he was told that there was no one named Henry working at the agency. It turned out that after the space accident back then, Henry, who had survived, had quickly left the space agency and become an ordinary person. The reason is actually quite simple, because Paul is just like John. His body is from Universe A, but his consciousness comes from Universe B. In fact, it's not just John and Paul who have problems. Alice in Universe A also often encounters all kinds of strange phenomena. For example, even though there was no piano at home, she could hear the sound of a piano. Another example, at her mother's funeral, she saw another version of herself. This scene was also seen by Paul, who fainted on the spot from excitement. Shortly after, Alice also saw her mother, which corresponds exactly to the scene where Alice in Universe B saw her mother's funeral. Alice shouted "Mom" loudly, and everyone thought it was because she missed her mother so much. Meg decided to take his daughter away from home to relax, and Alice chose to go to the vacation cabin. Meg didn't want to go against his daughter's wish, so he finally agreed. They arrived at the cabin soon after, but Alice kept thinking about her mother. She told her father that they would definitely see Mom again. Meg thought it was because he hadn't given his daughter enough care, that she had become like this. He repeatedly told his daughter that Mom was already dead, and that they would never see her again, but Alice still didn't believe it. At this time, Paul was also trying his best to find the truth. He went to Henry's apartment in Universe A, and when he knocked on the door, it was Henry. However, the Henry in front of him didn't recognize Paul. The two talked about the space accident from back then. Paul told Henry, "Back then, you turned the tide and saved everyone. You were a great hero in people's hearts, and even a mentor in the hearts of aspiring astronauts. Why have you become like this now?" Henry clearly knew the whole truth, but he had no intention of telling Paul. He even pulled out a pistol directly. On the other side, Alice in Universe A was sleeping in the cabin. Suddenly, she noticed light coming from outside the door. She got up and looked out the window. Outside was actually her beloved mother, whom she missed so much. Alice put on her shoes and went out to check, but there was no one outside. She could only call out Mom helplessly, which also corresponds to the scene where John in Universe B heard her daughter's call. Alice took a flashlight and went out to continue searching for her mother. At this time, John in Universe B was studying the recordings with her daughter. They talked about quantum superposition state. It turned out that John in Universe B had been exposed to this experiment a long time ago, while John in Universe A didn't find out that this experiment was about studying the two possible states of an object, until the day the accident happened. Later, they played another recording made 2 days after the accident. The voice coming from it was exactly Paul's. Paul was worried that John's body would bleed heavily on the way back, so he requested to leave the body on the space station. After hearing this recording, John and Alice finally understood completely. She wasn't her mother, and she wasn't her daughter. They needed to find a way to solve this problem. Later, John prepared to take the handheld lamp outside and hide it, and it was here that she heard her daughter's call again. But when she returned to the room, she found her daughter was sleeping. Alice in Universe A searched for a long time but still couldn't find her mother. But she saw another cabin. When she opened the cabin door, there was nothing inside except a living kitten. Alice was cold and scared, so she could only hide in the wardrobe to keep warm. Unexpectedly, a gust of wind blew the wardrobe door shut, and she couldn't get out. John in Universe B rushed to the cabin following the sound. Here, under the influence of the mysterious substance in the handheld lamp, Universe A and Universe B overlapped. John in Universe B saw her daughter from Universe A, so she took the girl to the cabin to warm her up and give her a bath. But just like Schrodinger's cat, when Alice in Universe B woke up and became an observer, the two universes separated again. John took Alice to look for Alice from Universe A. In a fit of anger, Alice from Universe B threw the handheld lamp onto the snow. Worried about Alice's safety, John had to chase after her. At this time, Alice from Universe A also walked out of the room to look for her mother. When Mag from Universe A found his daughter was gone, he also hurried out to search for her. Just then, Alice from Universe A picked up the handheld lamp that Alice from Universe B had dropped. It was also at this moment that Alice from Universe B found another cabin. However, when she went inside, all she saw was a dead cat, and there was even a radio placed on the table. She took the radio and hid in the wardrobe on the second floor. Alice from Universe A also came here. What she saw was still the living cat. She walked over to the wardrobe and found the radio inside it. The two Alices from different universes began to communicate directly through the radio. Soon, Mag and John also rushed to the cabins in their respective universes, but when they opened the wardrobe doors, there was no one inside, only the radio was there. Listening to the sound coming from the radio, John became more and more shocked. She thought her daughter had returned to their cabin, so she went back and drove off to look for her. The kerosene lamp in the abandoned cabin was blown over, and the cabin caught fire. When John saw the fire, she drove back again, but she found that the abandoned cabin had actually turned into her own cabin, and when she rushed in, the flames disappeared in an instant. It was as if they had all been trapped in the world inside the picture frame. She hurried in, opened the wardrobe again, and inside was Alice from Universe B. Alice was talking to Alice from Universe A through the radio. Through their conversation, the three of them finally learned the truth. John promised her daughter from Universe A that she would find a way to go back. But, just at this moment, the flames burned through the picture frame, and the cabin quickly caught fire. John hurriedly carried Alice and escaped from the cabin. She thought her daughter from Universe A was still inside, so she handed Alice from Universe B to the people who had arrived outside and rushed back in. The person who had arrived outside was Henry. He had followed the group to get the handheld lamp. However, the moment he found the handheld lamp, he actually had a spiritual exchange with Henry from Universe A. Due to the influence of the mysterious substance, Dr. Henry from Universe B arrived in Universe A. When he regained consciousness, he found himself holding a gun, and his favorite disciple Paul was lying on the ground. He quickly dialed the emergency number, hoping to save Paul. As for the murderous Henry from Universe A, he found himself in a world of ice and snow, with a girl thrust into his arms. He was also completely confused. Henry immediately put the girl down in the snow and left without a second thought. John didn't see her daughter in the cabin. When she ran out, she found that Alice from Universe B had been left on the ground, barely breathing. She hurried to give first aid to her daughter. At this moment, her daughter from Universe A appeared beside her. She hoped her mother would go back with her, but John couldn't abandon Alice from Universe B at this moment, and she couldn't return to Universe A now either, so she had to hold back her pain and continue rescuing Alice from Universe B. Soon, the voice of Meg from Universe A came from a distance. He vaguely saw his daughter, and also saw a figure that was very similar to his wife in shape. The couple could have met, but with the arrival of the search and rescue team from Universe B, the two overlapping timespaces were separated again. Seeing that Alice from Universe B had been saved, John began to look for her daughter from Universe A again. But in the eyes of the people around her, John was clearly mentally unstable. Alice from Universe B had a dream. In the dream, a mummified astronaut wanted to take her to find her real mother. When she woke up, she found only her father by her side. From their conversation, she learned that John had been taken away by Elena. Alice felt that something was wrong. She wanted to bring this mother back. John was taken to a monastery. This was a place where all astronauts with mental problems were gathered. It was also here that they conducted brainwashing therapy on these astronauts. John was tormented until she fell into a coma. When she woke up, she found herself locked in a room. After waiting for a long time, she finally saw Elena. John wanted to go back to her own world to see her daughter, but Elena told her not to think too much. Your daughter is at home waiting for you to recover and be discharged, Elena said. John still refused to accept this reality, but Elena dropped another bombshell. They had found out that John was already pregnant. John couldn't believe it. If she was pregnant, how would she ever return to her own world in the future? Just then, a strange sound came from upstairs. Elena said there was an incurable patient upstairs. Seeing that Elena refused to let her go, John began to provoke her using the words of the deceased Elena from the audio tape. Upon hearing these words, Elena fled in a hurry. At this time, Alice from Universe B was telling her father about her strange experience. She mentioned that her current mother actually came from another world. Meg obviously didn't believe her. He thought his daughter might have been traumatized, or perhaps brainwashed by his wife. But Alice knew what she had experienced was true, so she planned to go to the hospital to visit John. On the other side, the murderous Henry picked up the handheld lamp in the snow. He realized he had already arrived in Dr. Henry's world. After thinking for a moment, he swung an axe and smashed the handheld lamp to pieces. After returning to civilized society, the murderous Henry naturally came into possession of everything that belonged to Dr. Henry, fame and wealth. He lived a life he had never experienced before. Just then, he received a call from Elena. In Universe B, Elena was the goddess of all their astronauts. Now being able to meet her in the flesh in Universe A, he was also very happy. However, he knew that just like him, Elena had only traveled here through consciousness, so he threatened Elena to keep these matters a secret. After all, neither of them wanted to be seen as freaks, but Dr. Henry was quite pitiful, because the murderous Henry had killed a detective earlier, and now he had shot Paul. Dr. Henry was taken to the police station for questioning. Even though the polygraph didn't detect Dr. Henry lying, various fingerprint evidence had already identified him as the murderer. Dr. Henry couldn't defend himself no matter how hard he tried. At this time, John saw a familiar colleague. They had worked together on the space station before. However, after talking about her current situation, the colleague immediately turned cold and told John to receive treatment well and strive to be discharged as soon as possible. However, before leaving, the colleague quietly handed her 2 keys. In the evening, John used the keys to open her room door, but she didn't run away immediately. Instead, she chose to go upstairs to see who that patient really was. When she opened the door, she found 2 identical insane old men. This old man was no ordinary person. He was the first person to go to outer space. He had been imprisoned for life because he refused to accept reality and kept resisting. But why did she see 2 identical old men? Could it be that the old man from the other world was also imprisoned here? Seeing this scene, John realized that she could never escape, so she went back to her room and prepared to accept everything for the time being. On the other side, Alice from Universe B was chatting with Lana, Paul's daughter. She talked about how her mother might not be her real mother. Lana felt a little envious. At least she still had a mother by her side, while she would never see her father again. Similarly, the 2 girls in Universe A were also chatting. The only difference was that here, Alice envied Lana because Lana's father had been able to come back. The video call ended soon after. The 2 Alices walked out of their respective wardrobes at the same time. They both saw the radio at home as well. Alice from Universe A wanted to see if she could communicate with Alice from Universe B, but after sending the message, there was no response. Alice from Universe B did hear the sound, but she remembered Lana's words. At least she had a mother with her now. Thinking of this, she decided to find a way to keep her mother. Perhaps understanding the other's thoughts, Alice from Universe A decided to accept the reality that her mother would never come back. She promised her father that she would never mention her mother again. At this time, John was still receiving treatment in the monastery. She played the piano skillfully, even though she had never learned to play it before. But the sorrow in her heart could only be hidden deep inside. Seeing Elena approaching, the two opened their hearts and talked about this little-known secret, but Elena said, knowing these truths won't help you. It's better to accept reality and live a good life. Soon after, Mag also came to visit John with their daughter. John also began to have a heart-to-heart talk with Alice. Since none of us can change all this, we might as well try to get along well. After all, in a sense, they are still biologically related as mother and daughter. Of course, accepting reality doesn't mean forgetting their previous loved ones. They can still miss the people from their past lives. Having said this, the mother and daughter both let go of the estrangement in their hearts and prepared to embrace a new life. But there was still one hurdle to overcome for the time being, and that was her husband. Mag, even though she clearly knew the husband in front of her wasn't the one from her past, John still resignedly expressed her love for him. Mag seemed unwilling to dig into the past either. After all, a normal wife was already a rare blessing compared to a mentally ill one, so he also disingenuously replied, "I love you too." For the moment, it seemed everyone had accepted their fate, and all the truths would be covered up. However, for some reason, Elena decided to reveal the truth herself online, and call on all astronauts with similar experiences to uncover the secrets of space together. Meanwhile, Paul suddenly woke up from his coma. He stared at his arm in disbelief, as if wondering how his amputated hand had grown back. At the same time, in the distant space station, the body of John from Universe A was still floating there, and her message was still playing on the tablet. Suddenly, the corpse of John came back to life and grabbed the tablet in her hand. The film ends here. Constellation, the most mind-bending sci-fi thriller of 2024, has set a new benchmark for sci-fi series. With its unique quantum physics concepts and exploration of human nature, a space disaster not only changed the fate of astronaut John, but also shattered our perception of reality. This series is created by the team behind Breaking Bad, directed by Michelle McLaren. It teams up with Swedish actress Noomi Rapace to deliver a profound reflection on quantum physics, parallel universes, and the bond between mother and daughter. The story begins with a sudden accident at the International Space Station. Astronaut John is hit by an unknown object while on a mission at the station. She claims the object is the corpse of a Soviet female astronaut, but when this mummified corpse reappears, it enters an orbit of eternal movement, making the situation chilling. After surviving a near-death experience and returning to Earth, John discovers her life has undergone subtle yet crucial changes. In her memory, the family's red car has turned blue, her daughter no longer speaks Swedish, and she suddenly knows how to play the piano. Her relationship with her husband has also become distant. These changes are attributed by others to PTSD, but John firmly believes her mental state is sound. As the plot unfolds, viewers gradually realize that behind these changes lie the complex concepts of quantum superposition and parallel universes. Constellation successfully blends hard sci-fi with psychological thriller, while infusing it with a profound emotional core. Unlike some sci-fi works that blindly pursue novel concepts at the expense of character development, it focuses on human behavior in extreme circumstances while exploring quantum physics and parallel universes, and questions the boundaries between technological progress and ethics. If you enjoy mind-bending works like Dark Incoherence, or are interested in the concepts of quantum physics and parallel universes, Constellation is definitely a must-watch sci-fi series. Although it requires patience to get through the slow build-up in the first few episodes, as the story unfolds, you will find yourself immersed in a world that is both thrilling and touching, as well as scientific and philosophical. Constellation proves that sci-fi series can not only have stunning visual effects and imaginative concepts, but also possess touching emotional depth and thought-provoking insights into human nature, setting a new benchmark for sci-fi series.